So my workshop today is about building the control plane for the enterprise, especially when it comes to AI. And this is a bit of a workshop, but I need to set some context beforehand. So if you want, you're more than welcome to, scan that QR code and maybe even skip ahead and see, what's in the deck. I don't have a lot. And yes, Sanka, the recording will be shared. So, I mean, it is being recorded, and I think at some point, once all the sessions are complete, they'll be made available on YouTube or an equivalent platform. I'm just going to shift some windows around here. All right. So my name is Marino Wijay. I'm a staff solutions architect at Kong. So I do a lot of professional services and implementation and design work here at Kong. So that ranges from getting people onboarded into an API platform to helping them effectively wrap around enterprise guardrails for the usage of LLMs on-prem, as well as things like service mesh. So if you've ever worked with Kubernetes before and you have thousands of microservices, you probably are looking for a different, interesting way to secure them all and take some of the fancy capabilities of API management, but apply them to microservices. I am a CNCF ambassador, so I tie and I work directly in the CNCF ecosystem, so Kubernetes and friends. I'm a big fan of technologies like Cilium and some of the service mesh offerings out there, as well as some of the automation platforms that are available to us. I am Canadian, so I'm based out of Toronto. And like I, previously asked, if you want to share where you're dialing in from, I'd love to know where everyone's coming in from. Feel free to use the chat. I focus a lot on community. So for me, this is a little bit of a community slash work thing as well. But I try to make it community focused because I don't want to really dive deep into some of the architecture that's out there. Every slide that you see here, I hand drew myself or I put together myself. I don't have a marketing team behind me because I work in professional services and I love to just kind of dig deeper into design and putting diagrams together. Oh, and I love coffee. I've got my little espresso here, so it just is going to keep me fueled for the next, let's say, 80-ish minutes now, maybe less than that. If you want to connect with me, go ahead and scan that QR code. Or you can just look me up on LinkedIn or Twitter or Blue Sky if you want, and we'll connect there. So for today's workshop, it's very straightforward. What you're going to need is a Connect environment if you want to not have to worry about hosting a control plane locally. One thing about Connect is it's a SaaS offering that allows us to host a variety of control planes and do all of our configurations from that standpoint. You'll need access to a local Docker environment because we want to be able to run the data plane somewhere. Unless you have a Kubernetes cluster lying around somewhere, Docker is probably the easiest way to get going. And if we want to be able to play with models, you probably might want to get access to an OpenAI key, which you'll probably need to pay for. If you already have one, feel free to use it. We also do have, um, the capability to connect into Gemini as well as Bedrock. Gemini requires an API key as well. But what's interesting is if you go to if you go to Gemini, if you go to Google, they actually do give you free tier access. So you will have the ability to just source an API key from there and effectively deploy that API key alongside our gateway technology so that you can just start making calls to Gemini. Bedrock, you'll need an access key, a secret access key, an access key ID, and then the region that you've enabled a particular model for. In my case, I'm using engineering's model only because I still haven't figured out how to get access to a model within my organization. That's just something I haven't really gotten around to, but it doesn't really matter. My model that I'll be calling is somewhere in Asia. And you'll notice that when I show you the configuration of setting these gateways up. So some quick context. I want to briefly explain what's going on with this entire usage of AI. What you're starting to notice a pattern of is you'll have teams and developers and even agents, if you will, that are making calls to models. Maybe you might have a local model running locally on your system. Maybe you might have a cloud-based model that you're using. Perhaps you might have your own model that you built. And while it's all cool and well to just front it with a chat window and then be able to make all the different prompts that you want, this is problematic if you're especially using cloud-based models. So, for example, if I decide I'm going to go source an AI model or an open AI API key, where that becomes problematic is now you have a situation where multiple developers might have access to multiple keys and have to maintain that themselves. And then accounting gets a little bit upset at times because they don't track where this usage is going or how these keys are being used. And at the same time, it just creates a bit of a black box for enterprise IT organizations to try and understand how these different models are being used. So ideally, what would be nice to have is a good level of control and governance over how these keys are used, how these models are used as well. Also, you might have like compliance requirements that an organization needs to maintain around the type of code that you use, maybe the language frameworks that you use, perhaps even the um, maybe the types of queries you can send. Like maybe you don't want to send harmful queries. Look, we can't get to all of this stuff today, but we'll get to as much as we can because I think it's important to see how this would apply to you within your platform engineering environment. We're here at PlatformCon too, and one thing to be aware of is that while a lot of what I'll do today is not going to be fully automated, you want to start thinking about pipelines as well and how you'd ingest a lot of these activities into a pipeline so you can automate the process of handing a key to a developer, maybe not the direct API key, but a key mapping that they can consume within their own code. Or maybe you don't even give them a key, you just give them an API endpoint that they hit, and that hits a gateway, a Kong gateway or an API gateway. And then that goes over to the model or set of models that you have. So there's also this concept of model context protocol that's been coming up quite frequently. You might have used an MCP client and you might have an MCP server that you're accessing. A lot of systems out there, like the Dynatrace monitoring dashboard out there, has an MCP server that you can use natural language, just human language, to query what's going on with, let's say, maybe a set of systems that you're managing instead of having to run like an actual hard query of sorts. Like you're literally saying, hey, tell me what's going on with this API endpoint and why are we seeing HTTP 400s or 404s or 500s of sorts? What's contributing to that? And that system might be tied into other systems, and that MCP server is going to return something that's meaningful for you to be able to quickly troubleshoot. You might be using an MCP server to develop some applications for you, but your MCP server might not be local to you. It might be remote and elsewhere. And you may not have a level of control over what that MCP server does or who built it, how you verify it. If you think about software bill of materials, you sometimes don't have that right indicator of how legitimate that MCP server is. So it might be taking in your prompts, and on one hand, it might be giving you some great information and data, but what you might not be seeing is the nefarious activities that might be going on with that MCP server. So you want to start thinking about things like a system of record to basically help you along your way with using an MCP server. So there's a lot of problems here that I can get right into. For example, I've already talked about the shadow AI. component because we're basically going back to shadow cloud where everyone just swipes their credit card and they have access to everything they need. But that just creates a lot of lack of visibility into who's consuming what. Sometimes, and no fault of anyone, we just don't do a good job of sanitizing our code. And sometimes we deploy API keys up into Git, and maybe it's in a public repo. And guess what? Like today, when we're going through some of this stuff, you might see my API key for OpenAI and Gemini, and that's totally cool. But guess what? I'll probably just remove some of those components there, so you won't be able to see it in full. Or I'll just like expire those keys later on because I'll remember to do that. But not everyone remembers to do that. There are other problems too that we want to solve. Like if you've got 5 developers working on a team and they're all asking the same thing, what you might want to avoid doing is having to constantly hit an LLM for the same request. So you probably want some sort of caching in place. So there's an AI gateway pattern that exists and it has existed for a while. There's so many different types of AI gateways out there. Um, Obviously, I work for Kong here, so we have our own AI gateway, which can be deployed in a number of ways. I actually meant to update this diagram, but I wanted to call out that you can deploy to Kubernetes. You can deploy your AI gateway, which is an API gateway to Docker, which we're going to do. You can deploy it to maybe a fully managed container environment that all you do is deploy the container and then the orchestration might do its thing. ECS is a perfect example of that. ECS Fargate is a great example of that as well. Now, when you think about how we have to transact with these models or maybe an MCP server, we're thinking about egress proxying or egress traffic. So what happens is we might have an agent that sends a request out to a, a model, an LLM of sorts, but the AI gateway intercepts that, and based off of a set of criteria and parameters, it might go ahead and say, hey, I can't send that request over here, or I need to sanitize that request a bit and remove some sort of PII, personally identifiable information, because we don't want it to arrive at a destination and for that model to retain that information. And then that data now lives publicly that other people might be able to consume. So we also have to think about the telemetry bit as well, how many requests are making through. Can we also capture some of the latency and understand, maybe all of this additional latency is what's contributing to a poor performing application. Let's just say we built an application in our environment and that application has to always go out to OpenAI or Gemini for a response or for it to process a part of your function or a part of your application and return some data. Now, there are a number of different problems to consider here where one, latency is one big factor where your application might take a longer time to process information or data and provide you an output because of higher latency. That higher latency might be because of more load on OpenAI. It's not out of this realm of world that we might see that OpenAI might become unavailable for maybe an hour or two because it's overloaded. So maybe we might want to consider like a semantic routing capability where we'll load balance between different models and based off of certain conditions, or maybe we'll load balance between multiple models just because we don't want to overload one or rely on a single model. So there's a lot of different plugins in a gateway that make this possible. We've got the AI proxy, which basically presents a single URL or API endpoint to, let's say, your code base. You're running Python, you're running maybe Java or C++ or Go, and you're trying to call out to several models, but instead of having to call out to several individual models and building the logic directly in your code, you just point to an API endpoint, which is the Kong gateway or the AI gateway. And then we want to get a little bit more fancy where we're controlling the situations and circumstances by which we'll load balance across. We'll take a look at the AI advanced proxy because I want to show you how load balancing works and how that all functions. And also, you'll better understand how we can tune some of these algorithms as needed just to be able to accommodate for our needs. Maybe we might have a situation where we have many requests that need to just stay on-prem or on-premise because we have a requirement for compliance for maybe some of that PII or PCI data even, right? Whereas if it's non-PCI related traffic, we'll send that traffic out to a cloud hosted model for some low end or quick processing or something that we don't have to wrap an SLA around. There's a few other plugins too. Briefly, the request and response transformer really helps with the way you send your prompt out to a model or the data that gets returned as well. And we can modify that in both directions as needed. And then we have a firewall-like capability as well. Now, firewalls can be static, right? If you have a static firewall, what might happen at times is that you can find ways to bypass it, right? You can trick it into thinking it's blocking this IP, but it might not, fully process maybe the port level information. The same applies if you use a prompt guard where you've statically defined certain prompts that cannot be accessed, but doesn't really allow for flexibility or allows for creativity. Let's say, for example, you have a developer that gets a little creative and says, you've got a policy, corporate-wide policy that you can't use C# in your environment. And, in the prompt guard itself, just the static one, you actually use C and then the pound sign. Whereas the semantic prompt guard becomes a little bit more intelligent and understands that, hey, this developer tried to ask for C# code, but didn't use C pound. They used C dash SHARP just to kind of bypass that prompt guard. Well, that semantic prompt guard is going to evaluate for similarity and capture that. Then there are a few others where we can template some of our prompts and basically simplify how developers consume models so that they don't have to overthink about like the way they have to wrap their prompts against one particular model or another. And then we might have a decorator here where we're trying to make a response be a lot more nicer or have some meaning or emotion of sorts or a tone, so that way it doesn't come across as dry and bleak or plain, if you will. And then there are a few others. Semantic caching really just helps with the ability to cache our requests and responses. So, like I was talking about earlier, if you ask something and then someone else, another developer, asks the same thing or sends a prompt in the same form, we're going to do an evaluation for similarity and return a value that lives in cache. So that way we don't have to go all the way to the model. We save on bandwidth, we cut back on latency, we even save on token cost because every query that we send out is a cost of sorts. It consumes a set of tokens, and those tokens effectively translate to credits. Now, a standard request like, what is a for loop doesn't have a lot of tokens. What is a for loop is about 4 tokens, maybe even less than that, depending on how you slim that down and how you optimize that query or prompt. But something very long and contextual. Let's just say you took your entire code base or maybe a function that you developed and that put that in a prompt and said to the model, hey, evaluate this and tell me, how bad this might be or what's wrong with it or how do I debug it. That's going to consume a lot more tokens because now your model has to process every single block and every single word, maybe every variable, and then that's one set of tokens. And then you have another set of tokens for the return value or the return information. And you combine that all together. And now all of a sudden, you probably chewed through about $1 or $2. Most of the time, when you're asking a model some questions, it usually costs a couple of pennies. So it's not too expensive, but it can add up really quick. So There are also other models. Actually, with the advent of MCP, feels like RAG is somewhat, it was a point in time approach of being able to accommodate for situations of hallucination, or if you wanted one model to send you data and then you send that data to another model for deeper validation. MCPs seem to be handling that quite well, but there are some applications for RAG where you might be doing a lot of this anti-hallucination approaches on-prem. And then the classic rate limit story, like, I don't really need to dive into why we use rate limiting, but there might be situations where different teams have different quotas and how much of a model they can consume before that traffic has to shift on-prem and or on premise and use a local model where maybe this just might condition a developer to save their more expensive prompts or more um, intelligent or deeper thought style prompts and send them to a model, whereas the more common ones they can send on premise. And then there's a few others. We're also going to take a look at the AI sanitizer, just so that you understand that when you send out data to a model, you shouldn't be able to send out your PII. If I send my phone number, a model should not know that it received my phone number. Um, that information should be redacted somehow, or modified or swapped out of some sorts. And then there are other plugins too, and we constantly still develop plugins. We take some of our existing plugins within the organization or within our plugin hub and try and adapt it to what we can do in AI. Um, a good example of some other plugins you might use is when you're thinking about agent to MCP or MCP client to MCP server communication. These communications just don't happen freely. We have to wrap some authentication around this as well. And so you start thinking about OIDC flows and OAuth 2 and how those come into the mix to be able to authenticate an agent for how it communicates with an MCP server, and then the reverse as well. Because we also want an MCP server to validate that it's talking to a legitimate agent as well. And it's not just, sending data to a rogue agent, if you will. And so you put it all together and it starts to look a little bit like this, where you might be going to different models. You might have an MCP server that you build or someone else owns, and you've got different layers for being able to handle the guardrails and governance that you need, and even load balancing between different kinds of models that you might want to be able to take advantage of. So, all right, I'll give you a quick brief look at what our demo or what our workshop environment is going to look like. And I'll go back to that very first slide so that you can just recall how to get some of that information again. Actually, the QR code is there if you want to just run this locally or use Connect. But I've got a MacBook, and what I have, and you're kind of seeing it behind the screen here, is something called Insomnia. So it's just a client utility that allows us to make requests to different models or different APIs. I'm not running my AI gateway on Kubernetes. I'm actually running it locally on Docker. Originally, I had it on Kubernetes, but just for the sake of everyone being able to follow along, we're running it on Docker, and you'll probably do the same as well. And then you've got OpenAI and Gemini and Bedrock as models that we might want to hit. So let's see quickly. If you want to go ahead and create a Connect account, what you're gonna do is you're gonna go to cloud.conghq.com. I'm already logged in, but if I log out, which probably isn't a good idea, but that's okay. You see this button right here at the top where it says new to connect and you want to sign up. You can go ahead and click that, because if you plan on running your control plane in Connect, you're going to need something called a personal access token. So I need to stop sharing for 1 second here so I can log back in and also prevent anyone from seeing all the different orgs that I'm attached to, which is normally fine, but also I here, I'll share the link to both. So it's cloud.conghq.com is the website that I just went to. And then that curl is going to be this. Give me 1 second. I will share this with you here in the chat. So if you are running Linux or a Mac system, that curl will work. And basically it's going to ask you for a few things. Something you have to think about is if you don't have a personal access token, you can run the gateway control plane locally. It's just going to be hard for us to work together so that you can get the plugins configured and ready to go. And I also think that if you're really thinking about this from an enterprise standpoint, you probably want to be doing something like Connect. There are certain situations where you might not use Connect. You might be using, let's say, oh, let me just check something here. Oh no, where's my? You might be doing something like a disconnected environment, um, or a dark site, if you will, where you don't have internet, and so you have to think about where you bring your images from, and you have to think about how you program everything offline, which is fine too, because we've seen that before. All right, let me go back into my let me just share this and oops. All right. So now you should be able to see both of these. And I'm just going to double check something here. All right. We'll come back to those in a second. All right, let's take a look at Connect for a second here. And to get us going, I've actually got a few gateways running. I'll talk about them very briefly. This is the gateway I mostly have configured, and honestly, the configuration we're about to do is going to resemble a lot of what we have in here anyways. The only thing that you probably won't be able to get going today is the PII sanitizer. That's currently gated just for a variety of reasons, but I'll show you how it works. And let's just say you do have access to some of the Kong technology. You should be able to download it if you have access to that particular org or Kong org. So we have a few gateways. This is the cloud gateway. So if you just want a fully managed, fully hosted solution, you don't care about any of the management of data planes or artifacts, you just go with the cloud gateway. There's a question here. Enter your connect pat. Yes, yes. So you need a connect pat. How you get that connect pat is right here. So I'm logged into Connect, and if you signed up for a Connect account, you should see something of a similar environment to what I see here in the overview page. Now, how you get a Connect pat, you click your username right up here in the top right corner, and then you click personal access tokens. I have a few. I've got the KCDNY because I was just up in New York to talk at KCD New York. And then I've got a few others as well that I'm just testing with. Oops, some of them expire. Oh, thankfully, none of these expired today because that would not be fun. So you generate a token and then give yourself a token name. Just be aware that the moment you create a token, so if I go give it a name here, test, right? Or no, let's just call it PlatformCon. And I click generate. That token's only valid for, I mean, it's valid for 30 days, but you only get to see the actual token once. So if I click, I copied the token, make sure you go store that somewhere, like maybe a vault of sorts. Now, obviously, there's so much more of an automation process you would follow to make this work for you in your enterprise environment, where you'd use something called a system personal access token, and that would be stored in a vault, maybe secrets manager or HashiCorp vault, and then you'd run a pipeline to make sure you rotate that out, either using Terraform or you can even use curl every so often, because you'd want to make sure you have um, a new key every so often. Maybe you have compliance requirements for your key to change every 30 days or less than that, actually, just so that you prevent any sort of leakage of keys or anyone having full access to your system to be able to make changes to your environment. Okay, so let's go back into Gateway Manager and we're going to deploy an AI gateway quickly. So I have a few options. I kind of talked about them earlier, and we're going to just go with PlatformCon right now. I'm going to call it PlatformCon. And if you click, hold on, I'm just going to move this window out of the way. Move this over here. Yeah, you can follow it. You can follow exactly what I do. The only thing I can't give you is my API keys for OpenAI or for Gemini, but we've got time, so I can show you how to get a Gemini key at the very least, and that would actually be pretty powerful. So let's go to next step. I keep getting Docker is not available. Yeah, well, Sanka, we'll come back to that in a second. I just want to make sure we get the gateway up and online for each one of you. Um, uh, Priyesh, let me see. I'm not sure which step you went to or how far along you got to. I keep getting Docker is not available. Check temp. Are you running the Docker engine right now in your environment?
I do have Docker set up, but not Docker Hub, if that's what's needed here.
You
No.
don't need Docker Hub for this right now.
Okay. I'll double check. Thank you. Yeah, no worries.
Yeah, so just running Docker engine. If you have Docker Desktop installed in your environment, that should be more than enough. Why you might be getting that message, that could be due to a number of different reasons. Maybe just double check and make sure your Docker engine is running on your local system. I sometimes like forget that every time I boot up my system, this is why I also don't shut down my system. Um, I forget to turn on Docker desktop, and that usually kicks off the Docker engine. Normally, you'll see a whale with containers on top of it if you're running a Mac at the top. But anyways, let's proceed. Vijay, if you want to follow along, um, let me just paste this link for you in the chat. This gets you quick started via your terminal. You will need access to connect. So there's another link to get to connect and sign up for an account. And then you'll need a personal access token so that you can provision the rest from your terminal. Oop, I didn't copy that correctly. I'll just type in cloud.com, hq.com. Okay. All right, so once you hit the generate certificate, there's really nothing else you need to change here. You would just run this at your terminal, and then once you have it up and running, you should see a data plane come online. I think what's going to happen in my case is that because I already have a Docker container for AI gateway running, it's going to scream at me, telling me I shouldn't be running it, which is in my case is fine. But if you all are running this for the very first time, you should be able to run this. It'll probably take about 2 minutes to get your container up and online. And then once it's online, what you'll see here is a check mark that says that the data plane node has been deployed. Um, I'm not going to proceed with this step because I don't want to. So there's my control plane that's already deployed. But we'll go take a look at mine, right? The one that I do have deployed at the moment. So I'll go back to Gateway Manager and we'll look at AI Gateway Local. So I have a data plane, right? It's running in Connect. Sorry, the data plane is not running in Connect. The control plane is running in Connect. The data plane is running on Docker. And what I'll do is I'll also bring up Docker Desktop just so that you see how it looks. Um, Mine, for some reason, decided it wants to, oops, it wanted to call it Thirsty Stonebreaker. So there's my container running. It's been running for probably maybe a couple of hours now because I started this morning just to make sure. Oh, no, it's been running longer than that. Yeah, that's right. I was doing this last night. I tend to do things very last minute if you haven't realized yet. Um, so I've got the Docker container running for Kong Gateway. The data plane is functional, and it's actually calling back to connect to just basically attach itself to the control plane that we have currently running. So a couple of other things just so that you just have some idea of what's going on here. Um, I have two other containers running. I'm not using the Redis today, but it's there. If you decide that you're going to be using caching, the semantic caching functionality or the semantic prompt guard, then you will definitely need the Redis cache or a cache to make that possible. If you're doing rate limiting, you'll also need that caching as well. Sanka, I saw
Marino,
you.
quick question.
Yeah,
Yeah.
go
So
ahead.
what's the role of data plane here?
So the data plane is the actual proxy. It's the one that's receiving the traffic, intercepting it, and then making a decision based off of the configuration that it's stored in memory. So when you create a configuration in Connect, and for your control plane, which we'll see momentarily, uh, the control plane isn't processing the traffic. It's not processing your data layer traffic. It's actually just sending configuration or sharing configuration to this data plane. So I will connect to the data plane and all my traffic gets proxied through it.
I see. Like for instance, if you have to do any sanitization, any of the regex or any sign stuff you do internally, it's actually done within data plane. But however, that it's essentially the control plane is routing the traffic to data plane to perform those functions.
Well, management traffic is sent to the data plane here. But when I connect, I'll show you the URL that I connect to. It's actually a local host URL, port 8000. So when I connect to that, that's this entity that I'm hovering over at the moment, if you can see.
Okay.
And what happens is if, let's just say I'm using the PII service or the PII sanitizer service. When I send traffic to the gateway then sends it to the PII service, which does the sanitization, sends it back to the gateway, which then proxies it out to wherever it needs to go. So we'll see that in a few seconds, or not a few seconds, in a
Okay.
few
I
moments.
see.
Yeah.
So all these are Kong products, or it is allowing the developers to develop their own modules. For instance, instead of
Yeah.
sanitizer, someone wants to build encryption.
No,
Um,
these are our builds. So these are
I see. Gotcha.
private builds that we made. The only thing that's not Kong specific is the Redis build here. So this is a
Got
standard
it.
Redis container. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
Is it a Kong plugin?
Yeah. So there's a plugin. I'll show you that momentarily as well so that we can see how this is configured and how we access it and send traffic to it. So going back here, right? Now we have our data plane configured. If you have your data plane up and running now, I'm actually curious, do you all see AI Manager here at the bottom for those that have logged into Connect? Thumbs up if you see it.
I see it.
Okay, great. So, AI Manager is probably the fastest way to get this configured. You can also set it up through another means if you want to. But here's something I'll show you, right? So right now, I have a few different AI Manager instances set up. All that's really going on here is that I've got a data plane. I've got to attach a configuration to it. That configuration is LLM based configuration. This is a simple way to do this. Now, I could also go directly to the plugin and configure it, but I'll show you how easy it is to kind of get this going. Before we do that, someone had asked about getting an API key for Gemini. So let's go to Gemini for a second. Go to Gemini, go to Google. Um, we'll log in and let's see, actually, let me go back here. So you see this little button here that says for developers up at the top. If you're already logged in, then you click that button. And now we're in. Oh, I have not signed in. Interesting. Okay, I'll sign in. All right, now I'm in. Okay. Ooh, they've changed some stuff here. Interesting. All right, so what we want to do is we want to go to the Gemini API, right? So now I'm in the Gemini API. And what I want to do is see the API keys up here. So there's a button here to get Gemini API key in Google AI Studio. If you click that, I have my API key here. Actually, that doesn't look like my API key. Let me take a look at something. Maybe it is. I can't remember now. Yep, that's my API key. Okay. I know because of the last few digits that it ends in. So all you have to do is click create API key. And if you, as long as you have a project, we can go ahead and create an API key here. And it's just going to generate a new API key for me. Now, I got to expire that one, so you shouldn't be able to use that one at all. I'm going to delete this key so that you all can't try and take it from me. Because the last thing I need is, hey, why has your utilization gone up significantly on this API? And then I've got to explain a number of things. Now, all right. So we've got an API key, assuming that you have got it set up. And we also need to go and take a look at some of the models. So let's look at all the models because we need a model name. So there's, Gemini 2.5 Pro, there's Flash. In fact, your API keys can actually be used for free. Like there's a free tier that you get access to with Gemini, and you should be able to just pop in your key into the way we configure our gateway and just basically send it very basic queries. Now, the reason why I have the model names up here is because when we're configuring our API, sorry, our gateway, we actually need to specify a model. So I'll have that handy, but let's go back to AI Manager here and let us go to expose LLM. So we'll call this PlatformCon Gemini, right? And we're gonna go check off Google Gemini. We'll enter a specific model. So we go back to the model and we'll do Gemini Flash. Now you have two options. When you make a call to the model, you can specify your API key or you can provide it here. Thankfully, you can't see this, so what I do is I can go in here and copy and paste my key. Right here, okay. And the last thing I need to do is I need to give it a path, right? So if I do this / and then Gemini dash platform con, now I know which model I'm going to, which is going to be Gemini Flash. I'm going to be routing to the Gemini PlatformCon environment, or specifically the model, but it's going to flow through the AI gateway. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the control plane. So AI gateway local's mine. Yours might be called something different. It might just be called AI gateway, but I selected AI gateway. I'm going to click save. And now I have PlatformCon Gemini. And remember, if we go back and look at the details here, what's the route that we set up? I think we need to go back here and take a look at this. So the route we set up is Gemini PlatformCon. So let's go to generate a curl request. So I have a few here, right? A few curl requests that I've generated already. I'm going to duplicate this for a second because I just want to focus on Gemini. And I'm going to create this right here. Now, for y'all here, operating in your own system, I'm going to copy this as curl. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to just modify this here. Gemini PlatformCon. Let's test it. Let's just see that it works, right? Okay. I asked it to briefly explain what a for loop was, by the way, but I'm going to share the curl request that y'all can use. So I'll copy it as curl. Hopefully the formatting isn't terrible. Okay. Hopefully you all can see that. The only thing you'll need to modify is if you decided to use a non-standard IP, or you decided to use a non-standard port and you used a different path, then you just modify those. Everything else can stay the same. But as long as you take that and run that in your local environment or your terminal, you should get a response similar to what I saw here on the right here. So what's really cool about this Insomnia tool is if you're doing some sort of API testing, this is a great way to just quickly build your requests, and you can get some information back from the model that you're communicating with. Now, in another environment, or in another setup, I've actually configured both OpenAI and Gemini, and actually I've also configured Bedrock, I think. Maybe not, I can't remember. Let's go back and take a look. So under AI Manager, I've got to find my local. Okay. So I have this local here, right? If you look at the bottom right corner, I've got both OpenAI and Google Gemini. And if you notice, I've got GPT-4o, and then I've also got Flash Preview, which is a little bit older, but it still should work fine. And if you also look in some of the other setups, I've got O4 mini, I've got O3 mini here as well. And all that just really means is I've just specified the particular model I'm trying to route to. You have that flexibility as well, especially if you're trying to assess cost versus quality. The higher the cost and the higher the quality of the higher the quality of the model response, the higher the cost, right? And also the higher the level of latency. So if you've ever, oh, yeah,
One quick
go ahead.
question. Sorry to interrupt. So, in the example you showed before, you had one model with
Mm-hmm.
one endpoint. But here I see that you have OpenAI and Google Gemini together. So that means, are you utilizing both in a round robin fashion or some other fashion?
Yes. Yes. So we can do that right now, actually. We can set that up. And if we view details here, and if we go to actions and we click at, no, actually, this is not it. So we actually have to go into load balancing. So under the load balancing section in AI Manager, we can add another target. So I've only got access right now to OpenAI and Bedrock as well, where's Bedrock? There it is. Okay. So let's assume that we're going to use Bedrock, right? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy over the region that I'm using. Okay. You won't be able to see this, and this is for good reason too. Because engineering will come after me and be like, hey, how come we're seeing all of these different requests come in from various locations or various parts of the world? And then I'll have to admit that I accidentally leaked the keys to them. All right, so we've got both Bedrock and Gemini set up here. What I'm going to do, actually, just so that we can be a little bit more intentional, is let's go back to Gateway Manager. Let's go back to our local gateway. Let's go back to are routes. And you see the one that says Gemini PlatformCon?
Mm-hmm.
That's the one we just built. So I want to modify this because Gemini PlatformCon is too specific. And what I'd rather call this is LB PlatformCon. So if I,
Oh, I see.
yeah, so now if I go to LB PlatformCon, it's going to load balance between both of those models, much like I have in my environment here. So I've got Gemini that's set up here. I just need to change this path to LB. And now if I start sending requests, let's see what happens.
Okay, I see what you mean. I see what you did. Essentially, instead of giving an endpoint which was created for Gemini, you created a load balance endpoint, but within load balancer, you have set up two different models. So that way, load balancer is figuring out across the models. But however, but your AI manager still shows Gemini, right?
Yeah. For some reason, it keeps going to Gemini. And now I'm kind of worried why it's not balancing between the two. Did I do something right? Maybe the model's blocked. Um, hmm, that's an interesting one. It should load balance between both of them. I'm actually surprised it's not load balancing.
Your
Let's
demo
go.
god's not helping you.
That's okay. That's fine. Let's go take a look at one of the other ones, one of the other models that I had. So if I go back into my gateway routes, you see I have another one called load balance here.
Mhm.
So if I click on that one, I actually want to show you the plugin setup here, and it's actually not here. It's actually at the service level, but that's fine. So this one right now is actually supposed to be load balancing between OpenAI, GPT-4o, as well as the Gemini model that we have configured there. So if I go to my service and if I look at the plugins, you see how I have an AI proxy advanced plugin running there.
Mhm.
So right now, I have two models configured. And if you look here, I have two targets that are configured. What this is basically saying is, and if we look here at the bottom, the weight is set to 100. The weight is set to 100. So that implies that I'm going to load balance to both of these models. I really don't know why my Bedrock is not working right now. Maybe I missed a key somewhere. But if I go back to my window here, now if you look, I'm using that same URL and I'm now going to the load balance window here. I'm just going to clear out my requests because, it's nice to start from fresh. And we are a coding expert, briefly explain a for loop. So I send out my request and one of them's going to respond. I don't know which one will respond immediately, but it's going to take this long because it's really taking its time to think about what kind of response it wants to give me, right? So we know that GPT-4o was the one that responded to us. Um, and this is the response it gave us. Now, if I run this request again, now Gemini responded. So
Do you
interest.
also capture the model response with respect to latency? Like that
Mhm.
way, you can say, "Oh, this one ran fast. This one it took average latency is maybe 2x or maybe 50% or whatever."
So yeah, if you look at these two values, right? This one
Right.
was the one returned by OpenAI versus the Gemini response. Now, there's a lot of things to consider here. Why it took that long, 12 seconds versus 4.67 seconds. This is round trip time, by the way. So this is from my Insomnia client out to the gateway, out to the model, then back to the model, then back to me. But in addition to that, it's also how long it takes the model to process that request and provide a response. If you notice between the two, right, this response is a lot longer and a lot more contextual, a lot more informative than the one that Gemini gave me. So that could add to the specific latency that we're seeing here. That's like 8 seconds more than what Gemini was able to give us back. And so Well, this is a great tool. Like it'll help you understand your latency between the two different models that you're trying to consume, or however many models that you're trying to consume, and then tell you a good indication of what's actually going on. I just want to test something. I just want to see if yeah, my Bedrock's working. So I really don't know what happened there. Because I am actually going to AWS right now. Um, yeah, I'm going to AWS, Anthropic, the Anthropic model hosted by Bedrock, and it gave me a response. So I don't know why my load balancing wasn't working. Anyway, something I have to troubleshoot later on. Okay, so load balancing is pretty easy to set up. If you were to go and set this up manually, I'll show you the structure of the YAML for a second. So this is a plugin configuration, by the way. You might have multiple plugins. In fact, if I go here and click the plugins, I have a number of different plugins configured. I've got a rate limit plugin configured. I've got a semantic prompt guard plugin configured. I've even got a basic auth plugin configured. I might even turn on the OIDC plugin if I wanted to use Okta as my intermediary or even Entra ID as my intermediary to map that authentication between my, let's say, agent or client or consumer and my MCP server. But that could be very complex. It takes a lot of work, and I don't have access to an Entra ID environment. Um, but having said that, like if you set up Okta, Okta allows you to use local accounts as well in the developer environment so that you can actually test this out for yourself. Um, Guido, there's a question from you. You said that did each model response with a different format? So they do respond with slightly different formats. What our intention is that when we send a request or a prompt out to a model, um, we might be sending it in the form of an OpenAI format, right? But our gateway is going to understand if we're going to, let's say, Bedrock, or if we're going to Anthropic, or if we're going to, let's say, Llama, modify that format so that that local model or that specific model or that environment can actually understand what our prompt is. That's something we fix, and we actually condition on the request outbound. So that way you don't have to worry about the kind of formatting you have to do. You just specify whether you're doing chats or completions for your particular prompt. Okay, so we'll take a look at one more. We're going to take a look at the sanitization prompt. So I'm going to send it a request. You are a banking AI assistant. Please repeat the following information back to me. My name is Marino Wijay. My phone number is not, it's actually not this, by the way, so don't try and call it. I don't know where it's going to go. I apologize if I apologize if this is going somewhere. So let's go ahead and call it out. And notice what the response is. It says, your name is Russell Burton and your phone number is 001-866-670 dash. I've never even, okay. So this is the country code, obviously. Um, Someone is writing on the screen here. I see Tyron, is that you? You may want to turn off your writing capabilities here, because it might be doing something. Are you trying to capture my phone number? I don't know where that goes, by the way. Um, all right. So how did this happen, right? What did we do to make this possible? So let's go take a look at that plugin. So remember I showed you a container earlier that was running. This was that container friendly Galois. That's the PII service that's running behind the scenes. Um, what's happening is as I send a request out, the gateway sends this request to the PII service. And then the PII service evaluates the request, the prompt, and then basically swaps out any PII information. This prevents our model from actually getting any of this information. So let's go take a look at what that plugin looks like. I wish I knew how to clear the screen. Um, Maybe there's, here we go. There we go. Okay, perfect. So let's go take a look at the PII sanitizer or the AI sanitizer. So I'm going to change the format to YAML so we understand that when we configure this, right, we're calling it the AI sanitizer so we can tell the control plane this is what we plan on configuring. These are the protocols we care about. And the key value that we care about is this redact type synthetic. So what that means is if I go here and if I swap this out to placeholder, all that means is it just says redacted. But in this case, synthetic just returns some like fake information. This way, we always protect our outgoing information, whether it's credit card information, whether it's health card numbers or social security numbers, phone numbers, addresses. All of that stuff has to get redacted and hidden because we obviously don't want our models picking up on that information and storing it anywhere. Now, this is an enterprise feature, so if you wanted to subscribe to some of the Kong technologies, then you would actually go about, requesting access to this, and then we'd share the image with you. But this is something you host. So in my case, I'm hosting it on Docker. You could host this on Kubernetes. You can host this on a virtual machine, if you will. And then you can effectively ensure that you can redact or hide or falsify information to the model, so it doesn't really need to think. It doesn't need to process that information. It probably needs to process the information around that information, the request itself. So Sanka, I see you have a question. Are there rules set for the AI sanitizer, as in rules identify phone number, sanitize? Yeah, so inside of the sanitizer itself, there's a whole set of rules that um, does an evaluation on whatever specific details are in the prompt itself. So if I sent a credit card number, it would review that credit card number and then actually redact it or swap it out with something that's fake or that's non-existent. So it identifies that very intelligently. In fact, there's logic built into the AI sanitizer or the PII sanitizer to make that possible altogether. Now, there are a variety of other plugins that you can configure as well. I talked about the rate, briefly touched on the rate limiting. The rate limiting does a number of configurations in which you can limit the number of tokens that are consumed, or you can limit based off of consumer. You might have consumer classes. Those consumers might be it might be like a set of developers versus a set of like let's say project managers that have different quotas in which they can go ahead and consume a model or a set of models. And you can even set like a rate limit exceeded messaging as you need to. There are other kinds of plugins as well, like the semantic prompt guard plugin, which requires a Redis cache to be running, because what happens is every time you send out a request, it's going to evaluate it against Redis to make sure that um, the request is a valid request. It's not part of the semantic rules. It's also in this one I have an allowed prompt that says questions about Kong. So this is very, very generic and very high level. So this could be about King Kong, this could be about Kong, the API gateway company, or even the dog toy company. And this is obviously not enough information of a rule that is specific enough that prevents like a harmful request from making it through or a harmful prompt from making it through. There's a question here. Are these plugins or features allowed for the customers when Kong Gateway is used? Are these features tiered with pricing? So these AI gateway plugins that you see are in addition to, let's say, a Kong gateway. So let's just say you're subscribed to Kong Gateway today and you're just using the standard sets of plugins that are available. If you want to be able to use AI plugins, you'd have to subscribe to it. And you would also have to be you'd be charged based off of the number of models that you consume. So if you're consuming 5 models, you'd be charged for those models, and you can use any amount of plugins that you need to. Now, There is an open source set of plugins that you can start looking into as you need to. If you go take a look at some of the open source plugins that we have that are not specific to enterprise, like just AI load balancing and prompt guard are two examples of open source plugins that you could test out and try out. They're not very flexible because they're limited in what they do, but they can at least give you a good sense of how the AI gateway functionality works. Now, the one last thing I think I wanted to show you this. I don't know if I have it here. Let me see if I can pull up my terminal quickly. Python, that's not it. Let's see, is my Python script here? Oh yeah, AI LS. All right. Now I'm going to quickly share something with you. And this is just so that you can understand how your developers can take advantage of some of this stuff. So I'll stop sharing this, and I'll share my terminal. So if you can see my terminal, let me know. I'll make it a little bit bigger. So I have a number of files here, and you see this app streaming.py. Let's just take a brief look at it. Now, this app streaming.py, forget about what the actual code is doing. Forget about all of this. I just want you to see this one thing. So you might be using various SDKs for your developers. I mean, as a developer, you might be using various SDKs. But the one thing you add so that all of your traffic now is forced through the Kong gateway is this base URL. This ensures that anytime you send traffic, it has to proxy through the Kong gateway, the AI gateway, for evaluation, for prompt guard, for rate limiting, for going to the right model. Maybe you're trying to send it to OpenAI, but the whole intent is not to send it to OpenAI and to actually send it to maybe a local Llama model, like Llama 4, for example, which probably has a significant amount of processing power, but you don't have to worry about sending that request out of your network. It stays within your network as well. Now, for folks that are checking in code, you can set policies that automatically inject this base URL. It wouldn't be localhost, obviously. It'd be whatever DNS name that you provided your base URL to and the actual port that it's listening in on. But you can set policies within your organization that inject that particular bit right into your code base so that maybe your developers forget about it, but as it gets checked into Git, that automatically gets added into your environment. So that's all I have. I hope it gave you a really good idea of how to get started with the AI Gateway. I have a few links for y'all to try out if you wanted to go to developer.konghq.com to understand some of the other additional features and capabilities that you may want to enhance your AI Gateway strategy with, or your enterprise AI strategy with. Here's access to this deck as well if you want to be able to just go back and review some of the stuff we chatted about. And then if you wanted to, try it out again for yourself, feel free to go scan that QR code for the AI Gateway Quick Start. But I wanted to, thank you all for coming, and I hope you managed to gain some insights out of how to best use our AI Gateway technology, how to form your enterprise AI strategy, even enforce some specific guardrails as you need to. Maybe you might be unsure of how to do that, but I hope I've given you some good recipes to start thinking about. And if you have any more questions, y'all know where to find me. So thank you very much, everyone, and I hope you have a good rest of your PlatformCon.